Well, all right then. Another update to the Ventures collection. And right up front here, we have this little EP from New Zealand called Let's Go. There we go, a little bit better light there. And if I bring it in, I lose my light. But there it is, Let's Go. And I just thought, what a fun cover. Although it looks like they stole the graphic from a dress pattern or a clothes pattern of some kind. There's not dresses there, but you know, I remember these patterns that my mom used to get, and back in the 60s and into the 70s, where she, you know, she'd make some of our clothes or some of her own clothes, and it had this very similar artwork on the front, very similar type of graphic, this kind of charcoal drawing, and or pastel drawing, I don't know what anyway, and then again, I don't think it's watercolor, but anyway, this is Let's Go. It's an EP from New Zealand, and I bought it just because it had a nice cover to it when it became available. And what are the songs on this thing? It's got, yeah, it's from the Let's Go album, and so it has, you know, Let's Go, More, Sukiyaki, and Hot Pastrami. Boy, those first two songs, Let's Go and More, I've said it before, they're not really the Ventures playing anything on, oh no wait, Let's Go is, but More is not. The Ventures aren't playing on More. That's some studio players they had to bring in for that one, only because I guess the Ventures were on tour or something. Sukiyaki and Hot Pastrami on side 2. And yeah, it's just a nice little write-up on the Ventures on the back. Can be played in mono or stereo. Now, I don't know whether this is either. I guess it could be mono. Oh, no, it says it's... Well, no, it doesn't say in here. But it is to be played at 45 RPM, and you get 4 songs on that one. That's pretty nice. Here's another one. I think this is also from New Zealand. This is Knock Me Out, where they've taken a little edit of the album cover. Let's see if I can get it clear there. And there we go. A little edit of the album cover, where they're just showing the headstocks. They don't have the model. Was her name Grimes? I think it was. Last name was Grimes. Anyway, another New Zealand EP. And Australia is also known for having some really neat EP covers. I've shown those in a previous video, although I didn't have the actual EPs. I had a CD box set that reproduced the Australian EP covers, and those were pretty neat. Slaughter on 10th Avenue on this one. That's from this Knock Me Out album. Love Potion number 9, When You Walk in the Room, Lonely Girl. I see some damage of her, you know, some of the paper's been torn off there, but it's still a gem if you ask me, you know, and the great graphic is the front anyway, so that's nice. That was a nice find. I was happy to find Dance with the Ventures from Japan. This was released in 1973, August of 73. Now it's a reissue of an album that now I believe in Japan they did also release Dance with the Ventures in the 60s, but it would have been Volume 2, Twist with the Ventures Volume 2. Yeah, I think they did, and on red vinyl. And of course, you could probably look at one of my old videos, and I'll have it on there. If it's, I don't know if they released both Volume 2 and Volume 1 of the Twist albums, and in Japan. That's what I'm kind of thinking about right now. But anyway, this in the early 70s in Japan, they came up with this rock and roll series, And I've shown a number of these before. In fact, I've shown a copy of this, but this one I found recently has the OB strip. So whenever I see that, I like to upgrade my collection and get it with the OB strip. Again, because it usually indicates that it's the first indication anyway that the record's been well taken care of if somebody cared to make sure not to lose. These things are usually you just tear them off, but you know, if they didn't, that's pretty nice. And this one is indeed in very, very nice shape. Let's see. Yeah, so it has a different back cover than we're used to domestically for this album. And the title's written in Japanese and English. It's all 12 of the original titles on the album. I don't think they changed anything. I'm quite sure they didn't, but other than changing the graphic on the back cover. So it's very nice. I think I have most of this rock and roll. Oh, I was going to say about this rock and roll series. This, in the early 70s, you know, in the 60s, the Ventures didn't really get hot in Japan until the Mosrite years, which started, you know, in 1964, really, essentially, starting with 1964, really. I think January of 64 was the In Space album. And that's when the Mosrite era started, and boy, the Ventures really took off in Japan starting in 64. And so they'd released a bunch of Fender albums before that, 12 or 13 albums the Ventures had out between end of 61 and, well, anyway, from 61, I can't remember if it was the end or the beginning, but from 61 through 63, the Ventures put out 12 or 13 albums. And those were all Fender era albums, and some of them were released in Japan, but not all. In fact, the first two, for instance, the one with Walk Don't Run and the second album that had Perfidia on it, those weren't released in Japan in the 60s. And so in the early 70s, they kind of caught up with that, and they made sure to reissue all the old, in this rock and roll series, I believe they caught all the Fender albums, as well as some Mosrite albums. They didn't really reissue all the Ventures albums in Japan in the early 70s, but they did catch up on all the Fender era albums, and then again, as well as some Mosrite era albums as well. So this is a nice copy of that one. Now this is a real gem, a real find here. Where did I put the... oh, yes. A few years ago, I found this CD, and it had Telstar and the Ventures Play the Country Classics album covers I'd never seen before. They issued it on a CD. I found out that these, later on, that these were 10-inch versions of the albums that were released in Japan originally in the 60s, 63 to be exact, as a year, 1963. And so on the back of the CD, they put the Japanese album cover and then the U.S. domestic album cover. And, you know, I thought it was a pretty neat CD. It's all in monaural. It's supposed to be a CD version of these two 10-inch records. And they added the 2 extra tracks on the 10-inch record versions. There's only 10 tracks. So this album only has 10 tracks. It is a 33 RPM record. I believe it probably is monaural. I haven't played it yet. I just got it today. And I'm quite excited to finally have this. This particular one was released in September of 1963. This is a Japanese record, red vinyl, 10-inch, 10 songs from the Play the Country Classics album. And so which two they take off? Oh, I don't know if I can tell here. Is Windy and Warm on here? Yeah, Windy and Warm is not. Oh, but Windy and Warm was on the surfing album. It wasn't on this anyway. I would have expected to be on this, a country type of tune. Anyway, I'm not identifying what two are not on here. The back of this, I've got it in this protective cover. The back is Japanese writing, so it's not particularly interesting. but it is a red vinyl, 10-inch red vinyl record, and that's a very fun album cover. You know, they just took some standard publicity shot of the Ventures and did some very fun drawing here. Steel Guitar Rag, Lovesick Blues, Born to Lose, I love their version of that on this. San Antonio Rose, I Walk the Line, among several others. And it is stereo. I was wondering, these say mono. I was wondering if this was mono or stereo a minute ago. No, it is. It says right there, it's stereo. You probably noticed that before I realized it. But, so, there were 3 10-inch that I'm aware of. 3 10-inch red vinyl Ventures albums released in Japan. Maybe somewhere else 10-inch record in other countries. You had 10-inch albums of the Ventures. I'm not familiar with any right now that I can think of, but this one, again, September of '63, and I used to think that this was the only way that Country Classics was released in Japan in the '60s on vinyl. And that's, if you read the discographies, that's what you would have to believe. I'm thinking of the Davy Peckett discography on the New Gandy Dancer issue number 99, a wonderful discography he put together. And he does list this album, and then after that there's a Country Classics full version of the album. This is only 10 songs, as I say. But there's a full version released in the '70s, completely different album cover, not like the Domestic album. That you'll see in a previous video I have. I misstate on that previous video. That this was the only way Play the Country Classics was released in Japan in the '60s. That's not true. I haven't made a correction to that video. I'll probably just put it in the notes under the video, the correction, and refer it to this video. I need to make an update. But the discographies did not know of any other Country Classics. I'm talking about the Davy Peckett wonderful discography he did, New Gandy Dancer number 99. That was the publication that he put out, and it had so many, every Ventures record you could imagine and didn't even know about, in a book form, a small book, pocket book form really, but wonderful publication. But this is the only issue he had in that discography, and other discographies I'd seen, this was it for Country Classics in Japan in the '60s. And then in the '70s, in the previous video, you'll see that I show this, and I am at that time, I was under the impression at the time that I made that video, that this was the only way that Country Classics was released in Japan in its entirety. Of course, it has a completely different cover than the U.S. domestic version. Well, it became a major revelation recently when I found out this is not, these two were not the only Japan releases of Country Classics. It was released in the '60s. This is it, a Japan issue of Country Classics released. If I look at the catalog number is 7592, LP 7592 in green up here. That would indicate, if it's sequential, that it would have come out around in 1966 in Japan. A red vinyl version of the Ventures Play the Country Classics. This is a beautiful copy of it. Red vinyl, all 12 songs as they were released in the US. It is the same album. So I need to make a correction on that previous video. I believe it was called Ventures Collection Japan Versions Volume 1. So it was Japan versions of the American albums. And so I was quite excited to find this. I didn't know it existed. So whenever you find an item for your collection and you didn't know it ever existed, and you've got quite a complete collection, as I do. Complete in terms of, you know, having all the titles. I don't have every version of every title, but this was still quite a nice thing to find. So let's see. These were the other 10-inch albums that I probably should, that came along in the 60s in Japan. This is, of course, Let's Go. This one came out in December of '63. The Country Classics one was September, so this came out after that one in Japan. 1963, well, of course, Let's Go in the U.S. came out in '63 somewhere, but earlier than this. This is December. It probably came out, I think it came out in July. You'd have to check the video where I have the detail on that. But, and then here is the Telstar. Also came out in Japan in '63. All three of these now. It's nice to have all the collection of all three. And let's get a family portrait here. All three of them. And they, let's see, each one an abridged version of the 12-inch album. This one's stereo. Now that's interesting. This one's stereo. These other two are not. Oh yes, okay. They definitely are not, because stereo would say SLOB, and these just say LOB. And no S in front, so that would indicate it's not stereo, these other two. So you know, I'm in the future, if I ever see a stereo 10-inch of these, I'll probably have to nab that one. That's the update to the collection for now, and until next time, I'm signing off.